I'm super honored to be at the Type Director Club. It's a very high bar. I still can't believe I was invited, so thank you guys. And this talk is a little bit of a weird one for me because about a year ago I disappeared from New York. I used to live here and I don't anymore. And so I wanted to explain, I think I'm gonna end up on my toes a lot, sorry. Yeah, so I ran away and this talk is about what I've been doing since I disappeared. So it's a little bit more confessional, not like risque confessional, but it's more about like process and things that I'm still figuring out. So be patient with me. Okay, so I am Keetra Dean Dixon, and I've had a really meandering career. I have done some typey stuff, some object design stuff, lots of experiential design, so like working with big teams to create spatial experiences for clients. And then I've also done some self-authored experiential work where I make people swing together and install anonymous hugging walls. So to help explain how I got to do some of these things, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I was born and raised in Alaska, and this photo was taken about 10 minutes away from my childhood home. Can you see me? Right there. So I grew up in a really craft-intensive household. My mom was a seamstress and my dad was a metalsmith. And we had a semi-self-sustaining household, so there was always lots of making and building going on. And for my undergrad, I went to a place that's actually colder than where I grew up, unfortunately. But I got a relatively traditional graphic design degree, and then a much less traditional 2D design degree at the Cranny, I call it affectionately. And then amongst all of that schooling, and for a little bit right afterwards, I got as many jobs kind of related to the field of graphic design as I could. I thought of it as like dating around the field. So I did branding and advertising and interactive and packaging and collateral and motion graphics and a little bit of live action direction, kind of picking up skills along the way. And out of all the jobs I had, there were two really influential ones that kind of gave me the most useful skill sets and helped me clarify what I wanted to do and how I liked working. And the first one happened in 1999, right after I graduated undergrad. Do you guys know Future Farmers? No. Look them up, they're awesome. They are still doing work today. They're an arts and design studio. This is what the work looked like when I was working with them. So during the dot-com boom, it was my really first big exposure to what we then called new media. And we were doing lots of stuff online, but we also did in-person experience installation work. And it was about 50% client-based work and 50% self-authored work. And this woman, the heart of Future Farmers, Amy Franceschini, was kind of in the middle of a transition into building a practice around her self-authored work. So she was really transparent about her transition with me. So I'm thankful for that. And the other really impactful job came about in 2007. I got an invitation to help start a lab at the Rockwell Group here in New York. And the group is known as an architectural firm, and at the time it had 200 people divided into 4 studios. They also did interiors and product design for cultural projects, hospitality work, luxury lifestyle stuff. And all of their work is driven by spectacle and craft. So on the upper left-hand side, that is the Kodak Theater in LA. The upper right-hand side is the W Hotel in New York. Cirque du Soleil, and then the Academy Awards set, 2009, 2010. But the thing that really got me was playground design. So I went to work with these two guys who are not related, but obviously are soulmates. This is James Titchener and Joshua Walton. And on the right, that is their impression of labby boys in space. And I think it's pretty good. So the lab's general objective was to innovate ways to blur the physical and digital worlds. So here are a couple of projects that I helped direct with the lab. The JetBlue Ring at JFK, the entrance piece to the Venice Architectural Biennale in 2008. This was called the Hall of Fragments. And my favorite is the Chandelier Bar at the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Vegas. And this is like a 3-story inhabitable chandelier whose perimeter is structured out of 2 million strung glass beads. And I got to help build that whole thing, like be involved from the ground up, which was amazing. But along with doing these spatially located physical, digital blurring worlds, we were also tasked with doing research and development. So we were looking for potential uses for new technology and new materials. And then we do these prototypes that kind of demonstrate the possibilities. And the most important part of working with the lab wasn't the work itself, it was actually the structure and the spirit of the lab, which really comes back to Josh and James. So when the lab first started, they decided that they wanted a flat hierarchy, and for each member to have an expertise in one area with this ever-expanding generalist knowledge. And so that goal really facilitated this environment driven by curiosity. And actually every lab member that I worked with ended up being a really fantastic teacher. So I got to learn from architects and engineers and creative technologists, and essentially that gave me the confidence to explore projects that might have a really intimidating learning curve. Okay, so hugely influenced by the lab, and I worked there until like late 2010, and then I was seduced away to be a full-time professor, and then I decided I missed making full-time painfully, and I came back to New York, and I worked as an experiential designer until April of 2014 when this happened. I moved back to Alaska. And the reason why is a little bit sad. My dad's in poor health, so it's important that I'm much closer to him over the next couple of years. But we decided to move, and I packed up my husband and my 2 pups, and we moved just outside of this little town called Homer. And this is actually a 5-hour drive away from my parents, so it's like just far enough away that I don't go crazy. And we have this little house, and it's on 18 acres of land, and it has a full woodworking shop and metalsmithing shop. It has electricity and heated well water, which is pretty fancy. Actually, over half of the cabins out where we're at are dry, meaning they have no running water, so we really are pretty special. And then we also have the internet, so we have everything we need. And we decided we would see if we really could actually do our job from anywhere, which for me meant changing what I was actually doing just a little bit. I was thinking of that year as a kind of sabbatical. I wanted to take time to recalibrate my life and re-examine my practice. And all of this has felt really similar to being in grad school again. So I'm in my own head all of the time. I'm always having existential crises, and I'm doing lots and lots of making stuff, and I have no idea if anything's promising. So while I've been kind of spinning into oblivion, I've been becoming more familiar with this specific area in Alaska. And it is very much what you would imagine it to be. I actually took these 2 shots from a bush plane, cool, and then the middle one from a deep sea fishing boat where I caught all the 70 pounds of fish that my dogs and husband have been eating for the past year. So it's beautiful and plentiful. And I do get to see humans every once in a while, usually when I make the 45-minute drive into Homer. Homer has a population of 5,000, so there's a few people there. But even back where we live, I'm still not totally alone. So our house overlooks this plateau. It overlooks Homer. This is like the outskirts of Homer and the ocean. And then if you make a 180-degree turn, you're looking out over the top of that plateau. It's actually the top of the mountain range that's kind of leveled out. And if you look close, you see the houses. So I like to say that if something bad happened and I screamed, somebody would hear me. They wouldn't be able to find me, but so it is sporadically populated, but it's pretty removed from most of the comforts and systems that a town can offer. So that factor really acts as a filter for the type of people that come out here. And I came up with a name for us. I'm calling us the Contemporary Frontiersmen. So we're all makers and builders and founders in our own way. We're all trying to establish our own place. And everybody has to integrate aspects of invention and functional problem solving to just make it through every day. And there's 2 general modes of living out here. And actually the locals use the term homesteader, and I came up with the complementary craftsman. So the first group are the craftsmen, and they are very clean, and they are well organized and well kept, and there's this stunning, clear plan that's being executed. And they have all of the right tools and the right materials for the job that they're planning for. And then there are the homesteaders. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the idea of homesteading, this idea that you sustain your own existence off of your land as best you can, and a lot of times families will pass this land down for generations. And in Homer, that foundational principle is still there, but it also implies this more specific lifestyle choice. So homesteading style often looks really messy and disorganized, and sometimes like a parking lot. But from a distance, what looks like piles of trash or abandoned junk are actually these more intentional collections. So they're actually these accumulations of essential scraps. So they're materials that are intended to be repurposed, or they're objects that serve a very specific purpose. For example, you'll keep seeing these like rusted out buckets sitting on truck rims that have like spatters of bullet holes in the bottom of them. Classy. These are actually burn barrels. This is my burn barrel. And since we don't have garbage service out here, this is one of the ways we can responsibly dispose of household trash. So the homesteaders have a general idea of what's coming, and they're ready for anything, and they'll use anything to make it happen. And here are 2 lists of descriptions of those 2 lifestyle choices. And essentially, after I looked at these and kind of assessed them, I realized that this really directly summarizes my entire creative process. And I always have to be flexing back and forth between these 2 things. So I'm essentially rediscovering my roots. And along with rediscovering these roots, I've been rediscovering my old methods. And here is a shortened list, believe it or not. And because of this new context, I'm realizing that this list has a really important partner list. and that is the conditions that are required to allow these methods to happen. So these methods are really intuitive, and they're very much part of who I am. And I can be more or less deliberate about them, but I really can't change, or I don't want to. But the conditions are things that I have a little more control over. And in the past, when they've been absent, it's been really easy for me to seek them out, like when I was in New York. So I didn't recognize the degree of their importance until Alaska stripped them away. So it's taken me a year to get to this point, and now I'm trying to figure out how to fill the voids. And finally, I'll show you guys some work. Okay, so I'm going to show you some work that makes use of these methods and a few ways that I'm trying to actually adapt out here in the middle of nowhere. Okay, thinking through making. So by this I'm talking about making with no preset objectives, often this reactionary making. And I originally started deliberately doing this when I was in grad school. And so here are some examples from 2006. I was using this process during a period of panic. So I'd frozen up, and I just needed to get myself making. So I started doing these one-a-days. And I had two rules. The first rule was that I had 24 hours to make the project from concept to completion. And the second rule was that I had to share it in the end. And then after that first year of these interstitial one-a-days, I looked at that full body of work and kind of assessed its inherent qualities to see what I was naturally producing. And as you can see, a lot of them are irreverent and snarky and bratty, and I was responding to all these conditions. And some things I liked about what I was making, and some things I didn't. And so essentially I rewrote that list to be a little bit more positive. So when I first got to Alaska, I thought, okay, I'll use this one-a-day process again, and hopefully come up with some new insights. But I ended up totally struggling for subject matter. I spent my day ideating, and I would end up falling back on old ideas, and I just wasn't moving forward, and I needed to figure out why. So if you look at my overall work that I've made since grad school, you'll see that all of it is really socially motivated. These are the objects of codependency. This is a teeter swing. They all fall down, so it's an active negotiating balance with someone else. So when you look at all of these, obviously I'm talking about interacting with other people. And the things that I was doing in graduate school were literally being done as gifts. There were things that I would give to friends or strangers. So even when this work isn't directly participatory, a lot of the subject matter is socially inspired. So it's inspired by direct interactions with people, but I'm also really inspired by just being a passive observer, like just watching people interact. So I was getting stuck during these one-a-days because of these voids. A person or thing with whom to share. I had no community. It's a little mopey. And actually, when I realized this, I did almost start to cry, which I blame on the fact that I hadn't slept for a while. But I was just so, I told you it would be confessional, but I was just relieved to be able to actually pinpoint what was wrong. I wasn't lonely. I don't get lonely, really. It's that I was totally isolated. And obviously, I was moving to the middle of nowhere. I expected I would be isolated. But I really thought that if I maintained enough direct contact with people, which I do all the time, always Skyping and face-to-face and chat, etc., that I would be okay. But I was not. So I really underestimated how important all of these just passive moments of social interactions were for me and for the work I was making. So I needed to address this to at least get myself making stuff. So I decided to start saying yes 2 unexpected requests that kind of fit in with these one-a-day thinking through making parameters. And I reframed the challenge for myself a little bit to fit external assignments. So most of the unexpected requests I was getting were for work, and those aren't exactly the social moments that I was looking for, but they hit on some things that really stimulated me. So they had to be super fast, they had to be reflexive, like a client or partner would give me something and I'd respond to it. They had to allow me almost all of the authorship, and they had to facilitate my growth, be something new and challenging. So here are some of the results. Okay, a lot of them ended up being done for the New York Times for spot illustrations, which fit the bill perfectly, super duper fast, really high profile sharing in the end. And then I was doing almost all of the authorship with some amazing art direction on the way, so I had some people guiding me, which is great. And almost all the requests were for lettering, which to me was kind of a surprise, because I actually kind of shy away from the term letterer, because I think I really lack chops when it comes to lettering. I am not a good letterer. I'm maybe an aspiring letterer. But more so because I think of myself as working with language. I'm frustrated by it, and I'm enamored this is a good example. I'm enamored with it and frustrated by it, and I don't have control over it, so a lot of the ways that I resolve my control is through like formal making friends with the letters, essentially. And part of my hang-up is with writing the actual copy itself. I love to do that, but I find it to be the really difficult part of the process for me. So before these sprints, I would just kind of happen across interesting language and pick it up and save it, and then eventually represent it. So these sprints have actually really forced me to contend with writing copy under a pressing deadline, which I still don't have technique for, but I'm getting a lot better at it than I was a year ago. So it still hurts, but it's working. Okay, follow the fascination and share the conversation. Another way I like using language is by exploiting all of its difficulties. So amplifying confusion or misunderstanding, or using a breakdown in language, or placing it in less traditional context. So exposing it to broken mediums or odd materials to kind of force an evolution or loss of meaning. And a good example of this is a series that J.K. Keller, my husband, and I were doing, kind of exploring this loss of message in wax. And how we would make these beasties is we would start by creating these positive type forms, and then layering hot wax by hand onto the forms, layer after layer after layer, like literally dwelling on these things and changing the colors as we went. And actually, I love pointing out these little dudes because I cannot control my curiosity, and so I would keep like slicing and picking into the big pieces to see what was going on. And so the little like mounds hopping around were so I could flip them over and see what was happening. But essentially, we would get the piece to its right size, flip it over, remove that original messaging, so you're left with this echo and evolution. And usually when I say the phrase, share the conversation, I'm thinking of participatory work or work with language in it, so this very overt exchange. But I was reminded how these types of conversations are really embedded in everything that a designer does. So I went to see the Graphic Design Now in Production show when it was at the Walker Art Center, and it had one of these layered wax guys in it. So I was looking at the work in the show, and I was trying not to look at people looking at my work and be discreet. And then I saw this older gentleman and these two young kids, and I imagine it was like a grandfather and two grandchildren. go up to the layered wax piece, and the little kids were like, ooh, 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 like pointing out interesting things. And the grandfather kneeled down and started to pantomime how the layered wax piece was built. And I was like, yeah. And this little boy was like, you could see the light bulb kind of go on, and he goes, and then he squats down and makes this karate chop across the top of the piece. And I was like, the little girl's like, yeah. The grandpa's like, yeah. I'm like, trying not to pee myself. So that was awesome. And at that moment, I realized that I'd been so totally consumed by the practical aspects of getting this thing built and figuring out shipping without it melting and it living up to the gods of graphic design it was amongst, and like just being really insular and heady from a design perspective, that I'd forgotten about these really important aspects to me, and that is providing accessible entry points to all of the work for anyone, and piquing these kind of moments of curiosity or critical examination, and to have it still happen even though I'd forgotten about it, and have it be this like really beautiful cross-generational teaching moment. It was great. So I've been, oh, I'm out of breath, I got so excited. So I've been thinking a lot about that in Alaska, the accessible moments, and leading people to figure out fabrication and how that is kind of a maker's perspective, like figuring out how they did it. And I'd also been looking for a good excuse to share these beautiful moments that had been happening in the wax while we were building these bigger layered wax pieces. And then it occurred to me that I could try to replicate these moments in wax and make them into creative tools. And that maybe I could create an object that called attention to its fabrication and then touches on this other aspect of the maker's perspective, and that's our tendency to be infatuated with our tools. So find them to be sacred or fetishize some of them. So I wanted to make an object that encapsulated all of those things and was beautiful and accessible. Literally taking scraps from that original layered wax process. And these are little bits that got caught in the bottom of my seed drain, which is gross. And I cast them into colored wax, hoping to make beautiful tools. So they're crayons. And I went back to that grad school habit of sending them out as gifts, hoping to start a conversation. And I sent them out to both makers and friends who weren't makers, and I called them, I sent it with a note saying retooling crayons, so that they would know what these things were supposed to be. And so I was curious to see like how much perceived craft there has to be in a tool in order to override its intended function. So when does it go from tool to use to beautiful object to keep? And immediately there was this dialogue, like, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of marks these crazy things make. And no, they're too beautiful. Don't ruin them. So it worked. And as a result of sending them out, I've gotten a couple of requests to move them into the retail world. So I'm currently moving them into larger scale production and tricking people to come out to my studio and help me. And I'm really excited about all the next steps, like figuring out the practical aspects of how to repeat this in a practical way and maintain it and make it profitable. But that initial concepting, like the prototyping phase was so direct. I had the idea, I made it, it kind of turned out to be what I thought it was. Like that linear aspect actually left me a little bit flat. So I'm in love with the objects, I really enjoy making them, so I'm gonna keep moving forward and see what happens, but I think it's those voids that are happening again. And this brings me to the last bucket that I'll show, and that is making through breaking and the influence of proximity. So first, making through breaking. And by this, I just mean using things wrong, like using them in ways that they weren't intended to be used. So this is an exploratory method that both JK and I share, and we do this outside of really goal-oriented making, like client-based projects or projects with tight deadlines, etc. And with these studies, it's a really wide range of subject matter. We're doing traditional tool exploration, new technology work, and a lot of work with more ubiquitous tools like Adobe Creative Suite. And we keep records of these quick studies, these accumulating libraries, and I'm usually looking for inspiring form. And then with these little seeds of ideas, we keep them, and when we see opportunity in a larger context to apply them or refine them, then we use them. And I think there's a couple of more finalized pieces I included in the slideshow. And there are two big reasons that I really love this process. And the first one is part of why I'm really enamored with emergent technology. I've always felt really influenced by my tools. They're very empowering, but they also set these unintentional restrictions. And I'd really like to have an active participation in where those kind of boundaries are set and leverage that type of power more intentionally. So it's this idea of our tools push us and we should push back. Very Marshall McLuhan. And then the second reason I love it, and probably the most important one, is because it's time that I set aside to like just be a beginner. Like I feel like the more that I know something, the more that I become an expert at something, the more I start squashing potential before it has a chance to happen. Like when brainstorming for a project, I'll start troubleshooting it before I even have a sketch for it. So with these studies, I can really let this naive enchantment happen and let curiosity lead and new knowledge lead. And that feels awesome, and it keeps me really actively engaged with my practice. And here are a couple of examples of how you can see these explorations resulted directly in the more refined application that I used in some of those thinking through making studies from earlier. Okay, so that is the making through breaking part. Now the influence of proximity, which my husband will kill me for reasons. So when I say I share the making through breaking process with JK, that's JK, I should explain that we almost never intentionally collaborate. We actually only do it when we're invited to. So with those layered wax pieces, somebody wrote us and said, hey, you two make something together, and so we do it. So it's more that we are always working side by side and kind of like breathing the same air, but then we make really independent work that is just heavily influenced by the other. And we call it side by side and accidentally together. So when I was in New York, I had a lot of exposure to a lot of other people's creative processes. But in Alaska, it's pretty exclusive to JK. So what happens when he's gone? And the answer is this. I get sad. So this says lovesick, and it's a blanket. And this is the part JK will be mad about. So he was going through this period where he wasn't making anything of his own, no self-authored work. And he was like, I'm over it, it's stupid, I never want to do it again. And I was like, oh God. And he was recovered, so it's fine. And it was just one of those normal creative lulls that I think everybody goes through. And it had happened before with him, but instead of me like being good and patient and letting it play out like I always had before, inside I was quietly freaking out. And when this came to me, I genuinely thought it just like, popped into my head without method. And I swear I'm smarter than that. So now when I look back on it, it's embarrassingly obvious that I was directly responding to JK's absence. I was obsessing over it, so I don't understand how this came to be, and I didn't realize it. And obviously, I thought it was a little bit sweet and a little gross at the same time. But I'm happy with the blanket, and in contrast to the crayons, I'm kind of satisfied with the whole process, even though it had no self-aware method to it. And I think it's because those voids were being filled. Like, I was contending with something really difficult, it was socially motivated, and because of this, I'm happier with the entire process. And this brings me to my last totally crazy, big, long-term idea that is just starting, and it's very hypothetical, so I don't have pictures, but I'll share the idea with you. I'm going to make the machines in the middle of nowhere. So this idea would take advantage of a few things that JK and I do already. It would use the making through breaking process, but be a little bit more focused on physical mechanisms. So here's an example of a crazy custom vacuum and release mark making tool that I did. Then this is a weird circle sprayer that JK made. Yeah, what? Okay. So the projects the machines would also utilize skills and leftover mechanisms from other larger, more finalized projects that we've done. For example, I did this install for the Museum of Art and Design in New York called the Museum as Manufacturer. That involved this 3D printer that continually output objects onto a moving conveyor. And before I started this project, I didn't know how to 3D print, and I didn't really know how to work with 3D models at all. So I had a lot to learn, and I needed to acquire all of that hardware and software. In addition to that, the museum couldn't fund an industrial conveyor belt, so I had to build an industrial conveyor belt. I had to figure out a way to get the printed objects off of the 3D printer build plate, which became a batting arm essentially. Oh, it was great. Fetch for the dogs. And I needed to facilitate this continual output and maintain unmanned printing. So I made all these things. I learned how to be a gearhead, which is really fun. I loved it. So along with learning how to engineer, after the installation, when we disassembled all of these parts, we have a ton of little leftover mechanisms that were all generated with the same algorithm. And so all of these gears function interdisciplinary. They are all cross-functional. So we're always repurposing them. And this is the background little Lego motor to get this guy rotating that we just filmed with the iPhone. So if we put a little bit of extra time in these little seedling ideas of the making through breaking crazy custom tools, we could make them more autonomous. For example, that circle sprayer. If we just mounted this dude onto a slow-moving arm or a gyrator, we could leave it playing on its own and see what happens. And just as a side note, I don't actually think this would produce seductive enough results to make it worthwhile, but it's an illustration of the thought. And then alongside of these bespoke weird tools, we would also have more common maker tools like a 3D printer and a CNC router and a knitting machine, to which we could feed this other exploratory content or partner with experimental materials. So the idea is to keep this space dedicated to these crazy little machines and have at least a couple of them chugging along, asking for troubleshooting from me, and creating this ongoing process and hopefully surprising results. So they'd be like fabricators and content creators and always a frenzy of stuff happening. But wait, where's the social part? That's the important thing, right? And that's where you guys come in. So the very distant goal it's a 1-year timeline right now, is to eventually open up this mixed resource for remote authorship. So JK and I would offer print-on-demand commission work, so work that is our authorship that we output on the machines. But we would also ask you guys to send us your own custom authorship, and the machines could act as a fabricating service or printing service. And then I would facilitate that whole thing, which would put me amidst a social exchange and your creative process. And then the super duper long-term goal, 3 to 4 years from now, is to open up an on-site residency so you guys can come up and have your very own crisis and work with me and the machines. That brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you. Oh no, lots of help. I love teachers. I have so many friends who are so smart and patient with me. And then also, I love computers that, yeah, computational algorithmic generators that will figure things out, and how many gear lines to put on something is awesome. But yeah, we got the conveyor belt working. And it took a lot of, it's one of those things where the museum was like, well, how hard can it be to make a conveyor belt? But for anyone who's made a mini, you're like, oh my God, like, why do you think it costs that much? But I convinced them to purchase the format without the motorized or the actual belt itself on it. And so then I ordered a prefabricated belt, so the material had already been tested, because as you know, the material will stretch and flex, and if you have it off slightly, it'll like travel over the however many rotations.
Yeah, we know that.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, if you just think about it, I mean, that's what, like when somebody comes to you and they say, oh, it's a conveyor belt, how hard can that be? And you're like, just think about it. Times it by 1,000 rotations, and how much does that move in a day? So yeah. We did figure it, but it did actually require us to scooch it like even with the so I got an old industrial sewing machine motor that I ended up doing a gear reduction on, which was fine, and then we actually, the friction and actually the 3D printing material, as you spin something, it heats up, and that material starts melting again. That was a problem, so we ended up I learned how to do silicone casting and all these other, it was a learning experience, but we figured it out, yeah. When the deadline gets there. Actually, yeah, no. With the more formal stuff, it actually is when the deadline gets there. But with the other, it's funny, I was at a panel talk, and it was with all of these amazing formal makers, and then my work is kind of divided between form and concept. With the concept projects, people were like, how do you keep records of your ideas? And I was like, oh, I email myself, I text edit myself, and they were like, pictures, hello. And I was like, oh, I just have, and I write the idea. And almost, with the swing project, I had to look for what was available, industrial kind of swings that existed. So it stopped being in my control, and so those, I'm within constraints already. So it's like, is the idea as good as it can be, and I have to execute it within the provided conditions. So.
Awesome.
Well, I think I am a compulsive maker. I was born with it. Like, I'm always making stuff and I can't help it. And actually, maybe it's more about art. Okay, I don't know. So I did a lot of performance when I was little, and I really love the arts and the connectivity and the magic of watching people watch me, but I had stage fright. Like crazy stage fright. But I just love seeing people seeing magic. and being able to really closely witness that. And then I realized that, yeah, I would never get over the stage fright, and so I better figure something else out. And then I could naturally really draw. And then all of a sudden people saw magic again when they were watching me drawing. And I actually ended up going to, I got a full ride for painting. But I feel like I was just trying to figure out what to do with this compulsion. And it wasn't until grad school that I actually really knew. So it was just that I can't help but make stuff, and then I love watching people see magic, and so all of that wrapping together. Yeah. When I'm like, what am I not doing? Why am I stuck? Oh, somebody help me, and that's what this list helps me do. And so embracing the unknown is like when I'm scared, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do it, or I don't, just keep going. And also seeking new and discovery. Invite disruptive change. So like moving to Alaska, it hurts. It's totally painful, but it has to be something that I can't expect, and I'm a control freak. I'm a total control freak. And so if I have a choice, I'm not reminding myself, I'm going to choose comfort path, and then I'm going to stop growing. And when I look back, I might have had a more relaxing day, but I'm going to be dissatisfied with what I've done with my life. And so I have to keep doing that again and again and again. Is this what you mean?
That's great.
Make the work I wish I was making? It's so obvious, but I totally forget it. It's like when you're walking around Chelsea and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Oh my God, that's amazing. Oh my God, I suck. And you start like negging on yourself, or like, why am I not? Well, what is it that I like about that work? And critically break those qualities down, and then reapply that. Why can't your work have social initiative and be brilliant and bold use of color? And it's a reminder to be a critical observer of the things around you and reapply it to yourself, and make that type of work. Should I keep going? Yes. Yes. I feel like a professor. This is why I quit teaching, because I'm not comfortable. Negate understood patterns. I think this is actually where subsets come in like embracing the unknown. But for example, negate understood patterns. I did this, my thesis project when I was in undergrad. This became such an intuitive part of experiential design. It's all about subverting understood patterns. So it's like swinging. Like I made those teeter swings. So here's an example. Make the work I wish I was making. I was like, I have this idea, these weird teeter swings that it sounds like such a dumb idea, and I can't actually explain what's so wonderful about it until I made the object and I took pictures and I posted it. And then my alma mater called me, MCAD, Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and the Walker Art Center were having this event, and they were like, we saw that crazy swing that you did. We want you to do something like that for us. So that was an example of, you make the work you wish you were making, and it illustrates the direction you want to move in. And then negate understood patterns. So obviously I was combining these two simple understood childhood activities, the teeter-totter and the swing. So it's very simple dissection and reassembly. And so then I was like, okay, I want to create a similar kind of negate understood pattern and make it a larger communal activity. And then they gave me a choice of space that I wanted to install in. And I picked this skyway. So it was an understood bridge between two landmarks. And then I was like, okay, this is a pathway, I want to block it, so people use it. So I'm negating an understood pattern. And then I insert swings into it, and then I put the swings in the wrong way. So it's just like tweaking a couple of things. So thinking through making, that I'm pretty much a stream of consciousness. I feel like we all do that with our diary or journaling. Making through breaking. This actually, I think a lot of times now, it's just a prompt for me. I feel like it's creative use of your tools. It doesn't even have to be deliberate. You weren't supposed to use it this way. It's just like you've gotten into this habit do it a little bit different or learn something new, or don't be scared to fuck it up a little bit or whatever. Follow your fascination. I think this goes back to that like bravery to make the work you wish you were making. It's like, do you like it? Oh, but you think it's not academically valid, or you're like, shut up, just do it. Share the conversation. That's like every single thing that I do. Infuse the unexpected into accepted forms, I think goes back to, so these start to be like subsets of the same stuff. Okay. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay, cool. Sir. Yeah, it's a struggle. I feel like it really is those two, like craftsman and homesteader, craftsman and homesteader. I feel like I am such a child all the time, and I get a little embarrassed about that, and then I have to figure out why I was an idiot, and I think it's always that, me rationalizing what the hell I was doing, but it goes back to the compulsion, like I can't, it's like you have that old, like the Tina Fey, I want to go do it. You're just like, oh. And then I'm like, why? And then once I can make sense of it, then I have more control over it. So I really think it is just me going back, contending with this like childlike human aspect, and being embarrassed and trying to understand it, and then being like, no, be proud of it, and then like doing the whole loop over again. So.